Before Rome, before Greece, before Egypt raised a single pyramid, there was a civilization between two rivers that gave the world almost everything it would later take credit for. The wheel, writing, mathematics, the 60-minute hour, the first law code, the first love poem, the first recipe, the first map of the world. They built the first cities in human history, cities with schools, courts, hospitals, and tax collectors. They looked up at the night sky, named every star they could see, and calculated the movements of planets with an accuracy that would not be matched for another 2,000 years. They wrote down their fears, their prayers, their business transactions, and their epic poems on clay tablets that are still being read today. And then, empire by empire, century by century, they collapsed. Conquered, forgotten, buried under the desert sand. Their name has almost vanished from history. Their legacy has not. Every time you check the time, divide a circle into 360 degrees, or read a story about a great flood, you are living inside a world the people of Mesopotamia built. This is their story. From the first city to the last empire. From the invention of writing to the fall of Babylon. This is Mesopotamia. The name Mesopotamia comes from the ancient Greek, mesos, meaning middle, and potamos, meaning river, the land between the rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates, rising in the mountains of what is now eastern Turkey, flowing southward through modern Iraq and emptying into the Persian Gulf. Between them, they created one of the most fertile agricultural zones on Earth, a flat, sun-baked floodplain where the annual floods deposited rich, dark silt across the land year after year, turning desert into farmland. This was not comfortable land. It was harsh, flat, and brutal. Burning summers, flash floods that could erase an entire village overnight, no natural barriers against invasion from any direction, no stone for building, no timber for fuel or construction. And yet, something extraordinary happened here. By around 6000 BCE, farming communities had established themselves along the river banks and in the Fertile Crescent to the north. They grew wheat and barley. They raised cattle, sheep, and goats. They learned to control the floodwaters with simple irrigation channels, digging ditches by hand to carry water from the rivers to their fields. This was the beginning of something that would change the world. When food can be reliably produced in surplus, people no longer need to move. They can stay. They can accumulate. They can specialize. One person grows food, another makes tools, another manages the water channels, another keeps the records. And when enough people accumulate in one place, doing enough different things, you no longer have a village. You have a city. In the southernmost region of Mesopotamia, a flat, marshy, sun-scorched land called Sumer, the world's first cities began to emerge around 4500 BCE, Eridu, Uruk, Nippur, Ur. These were not large by modern standards. Uruk at its peak held perhaps 50 to 80,000 people. But in a world where the largest human settlement most people had ever seen was a farming village of a few hundred, a city of 50,000 was as incomprehensible as a skyscraper rising from a field. These Sumerian city-states were the prototype for every city that would come after them. They had walls, they had temples, they had rulers, priests, merchants, soldiers, slaves, and scribes. They had politics and bureaucracy and corruption and debt. They had, in short, civilization, with all of its gifts and all of its burdens. Stand in the ruins of ancient Ur today and try to imagine it as it was. A living city of tens of thousands of people, its streets narrow and winding, its buildings packed tightly together, the air thick with the smell of river mud, roasting grain, and livestock. Mesopotamian cities were built almost entirely from mud brick, the only building material available in a land with no stone and no timber. Sun-dried mud brick for ordinary houses, kiln-fired brick for important structures. The bricks were made from the same material the rivers deposited every year. Mesopotamia, quite literally, built itself from its own floodplain. At the center of every Mesopotamian city stood the ziggurat, a massive stepped temple platform rising above the flat landscape like an artificial mountain. The ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE by King Ur-Nammu, still partially stands today, its massive mud brick core surviving 4,000 years of abandonment, its 3 successive terraces still readable in the ruins. The ziggurat was not merely a religious building, it was the center of the city's economic life. The temple complex owned vast agricultural estates, employed thousands of workers, collected taxes in grain, distributed rations to laborers, and operated as the city's largest institution, employer, landowner, bank, and house of God all at once. For the ordinary Mesopotamian, daily life was defined by the river, the field, and the institution. Most people were farmers, their labor organized and managed by the temple or the palace. They grew barley, the staple crop that fed the cities, brewed the beer and paid the taxes. They ate bread, lentils, onions, garlic, and fish. They drank beer, which was safer than the river water. Mesopotamian beer was a serious institution. There were over 20 words for different types of beer in the Sumerian language. It was drunk through reed straws to filter out the grain chaff. It was used to pay workers, offered to gods, and drunk at every level of society, from the lowest laborer to the highest priest. The streets of a Mesopotamian city were narrow, unpaved, and unlit at night. Houses were built inward, blank mud brick walls facing the street, rooms arranged around a central courtyard that provided light, ventilation, and a private outdoor space. The wealthy had larger courtyards, upper stories, and dedicated servants. The poor had one room and a roof to sleep on in summer. Women in ancient Mesopotamia occupied a more complex social position than later ancient civilizations would allow. Sumerian women could own property, conduct business, initiate divorce, and testify in court. Female scribes existed. Priestesses held significant religious and economic authority. The high priestess of the moon god Nana at Ur was among the most powerful individuals in the city. The poet Enheduanna, daughter of the great king Sargon of Akkad, high priestess of Ur, is the first named author in human history. She wrote hymns to the goddess Inanna that survive to this day. The first writer whose name we know was a woman. In 1901, a French archaeological expedition excavating the ancient city of Susa in modern Iran uncovered a black diorite stele nearly 2.5 meters tall. Carved into its surface were 282 laws, topped by an image of the sun god Shamash handing a rod and ring, symbols of justice, to a robed king. The king was Hammurabi of Babylon. The date of composition was approximately 1754 BCE. The Code of Hammurabi is not the oldest law code in history. Sumerian law codes predate it by several centuries, but it is the most complete ancient law code ever found, and it reveals a society of extraordinary legal complexity. The 282 laws of Hammurabi cover wages, property rights, commercial contracts, marriage and divorce, adoption, inheritance, medical malpractice, building standards, agricultural responsibilities, and the treatment of slaves. Some laws are shockingly familiar. A builder whose house collapses and kills the owner shall be put to death. A merchant who cheats on weights and measures shall be fined. A doctor whose patient dies from malpractice shall have his hand cut off. Some reflect a society organized by rigid class distinctions. The penalties for the same offense differed depending on whether the victim was a free person, a commoner, or a slave. The famous principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, appears explicitly in the code. If a man destroys the eye of another man of equal standing, they shall destroy his eye. What is remarkable about the Code of Hammurabi is not its harshness, but its ambition. In the prologue, Hammurabi declares that the gods called him to rule in order to bring justice to the land, to protect the weak from the strong, the widow and the orphan from the powerful. This is an extraordinary claim. The king is not above the law. He is accountable to it, and to the gods who gave it to him. Law is not the arbitrary will of power. Law is a divine gift, and the ruler's primary obligation is to uphold it. Mesopotamia was never at peace for long. The flat, open, fertile land between the rivers was irresistible to those who lacked it, and the cities that grew rich on its produce were equally irresistible to those who coveted what they had built. The history of Mesopotamia is, in large part, a history of conquest. City-states fighting city-states, rising empires absorbing everything in their path, and fallen empires being absorbed in turn by the next wave of conquerors. Around 2334 BCE, a man named Sargon seized power in the city of Kish and began a military campaign that would last decades and transform the ancient world. Sargon of Akkad is the first empire builder in recorded history. Over the course of his reign, he conquered all of Sumer, united Mesopotamia under a single ruler for the first time, and extended his power as far as modern Syria, Lebanon, and possibly Anatolia. He called himself king of the four corners of the world. For the first time in history, that claim was not entirely an exaggeration. The Akkadian Empire he founded lasted roughly a century and a half before collapsing, partly from internal rebellion, partly from a prolonged drought that devastated agriculture across the region around 2200 BCE. The world's first empire fell in part to climate change. Of all the powers that rose and fell in Mesopotamia, none was more feared than Assyria. The Assyrian Empire, which reached its peak between roughly 900 and 612 BCE, was the dominant military power of the ancient Near East for nearly 3 centuries. The Assyrians were systematic and terrifying in their approach to warfare. They deployed iron weapons, a decisive technological advantage over bronze-armed opponents. They used siege engines, battering rams, and assault ramps against walled cities. They organized their vast armies with a logistics and command structure that would not look entirely out of place in a modern military manual. And they were deliberately, strategically brutal. Conquered populations were deported en masse, entire peoples uprooted from their homelands and relocated to distant parts of the empire, destroying local resistance and cultural cohesion simultaneously. Their palace reliefs, carved stone panels depicting their military campaigns, show prisoners impaled on stakes, cities burned, populations marched into captivity. These images were not hidden. They were displayed proudly in the throne rooms of Assyrian kings, a calculated message to every visiting ambassador and vassal king. The Assyrians conquered Egypt. They destroyed the kingdom of Israel. They besieged Jerusalem. They sacked Babylon, the greatest city in the world, and then rebuilt it when they realized they needed its prestige. Babylon occupies a unique place in the history of Mesopotamia and in the imagination of the ancient world. It was, at various periods, the greatest city on earth. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled from 605 to 562 BCE, Babylon was rebuilt on a scale that astonished every ancient writer who described it. The Ishtar Gate, faced with deep blue glazed brick decorated with alternating rows of lions, bulls, and dragons in gold and white, was the most spectacular city gate in the ancient world. The processional way leading through it was lined with glazed brick walls decorated with over 100 lion reliefs. The city had massive double walls, a great temple tower dedicated to the god Marduk, and, according to ancient accounts, the legendary Hanging Gardens, considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. No civilization lasts forever, but the civilization of Mesopotamia lasted longer than most, roughly 3,000 years from the first Sumerian cities to the final fall of Babylon to the Persian Empire in 539 BCE, and beyond that to the last cuneiform tablet written in the 1st century CE. Its decline was not a single event, but a long sequence of collapses, recoveries, and final extinctions, each wave of conquest absorbing the previous culture and then being absorbed in turn. The Assyrian Empire, which had dominated the ancient Near East for 3 centuries, fell with shocking suddenness. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians besieged and sacked Nineveh, the greatest city in the world, capital of the empire that had conquered Egypt. The city burned. The library of Ashurbanipal, with its tens of thousands of tablets, was buried under the collapsing ruins of the palace, where it would lie for 2,500 years before being rediscovered. The ancient world celebrated the fall of Nineveh. The biblical book of Nahum is essentially a poem of triumph over Assyria's destruction. No empire in the ancient world was mourned less. The fall of Assyria gave Babylon its final moment of greatness. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, the Neo-Babylonian Empire rebuilt the ancient city into its most magnificent form, defeated Egypt, destroyed Jerusalem, and ruled the ancient Near East. But it lasted barely a century. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia marched into Babylon, almost without resistance. The last Babylonian king, Nabonidus, had alienated the priesthood by neglecting the city's gods. The Persian army entered through the gates that had been left open. According to later accounts, Cyrus was welcomed as a liberator. The 3,000-year civilization of Mesopotamia did not end in fire and conquest. It ended with open gates and a new king who spoke a different language.